on YouTube to pick us up. And wait for it. We are live on YouTube. Hey, Ash. Hey, Coca-Cola and Cam Hamrick. All right. So thank y'all very much. Now we are going to be focusing on tonight, roughly on APUSH Unit 4. We'll look at the age of Jefferson, the age of Jackson. We can even get into, the lead into the Civil War. We're going to be focusing on questions tonight going from 1800 to 1860. Okay, so that is going to be our emphasis area tonight. Is 1800 to 1860. So that those questions are going to get priority. So going from there, let me also remind everyone that, a little word from our sponsor here. Okay, so let me just go ahead and pull that up here. Oh, excuse me. Actually, that was a cough. Y'all don't have to bless me for that because that was a cough. I didn't sneeze, right? So with that, let me go ahead and pull this up here. Here a little word from our sponsor, Romulus APUSH Review. It's a handy little trivia app that I put on the App Store some years ago, and basically you can go into any topic in U.S. history, from Native Americans to European colonization, the age of Jackson, early national America, want to review the Constitution, and that is having to do with, it'll give you 4 options and just a little trivia game, and you can just go through that. You can be doing that, when you're ready to go in the AP exam, when you're in line for lunch, when you're riding in the car. This is just a nice little handy review, and it's very useful for people who are having trouble remembering what was the name of this or that. And it's just good to be able to, just go through and just answer little questions like that. So Romulus APUSH Review is available in the App Store and on Google Play. Now, also tonight at 9:30, I'm hosting a multiple choice strategy session. Okay, that is a $10 admission. It's available at crowdcast.io/Tom Ritchie. I will make sure to put a link in both of the chats. Now, one thing about this is there is going to be a, as far as that goes, that there will be a link for people who want to, who want to look at it, who want to look at it later on. So as far as that goes, the multiple choice strategy session, if you're a teacher, you want your students to see it and that kind of thing. Okay, so those are going to be available. That's going to be available. That's starting at 9:30. Okay, so that's starting at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. That's going to be a multiple choice strategy session. And again, the premium sessions, people tend to get a lot out of them, because what we're going to do here, I've actually got my document, the Ritchie Doctrine, that's about APUSH multiple choice. I've got that online. But at the same time, we actually model it. We're going to go through APUSH, APUSH questions and go over the multiple choice. So the multiple choice strategy session is at, tonight at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. So that's going to be, and I'm going to go ahead and put the link there. Hey, Shar. All right. So we've got that. So y'all can go ahead and sign up for that if y'all would like to do that. And of course, there we go here, the Ritchie Doctrine. Yeah, I need to have my own kind of doctrine here. So we are going to have a multiple choice strategy session at 9:30 p.m. If you want to sign up for that, I have posted the links there. So looking forward to seeing y'all there. Oh, Paradise Valley High School. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Altman. And, I'm also, always glad to hear from the folks in Phoenix. And I think I've been hearing from people from Paradise Valley for some years now. Okay, so as far as this goes, somebody wants to go into, let's talk about the evolution of political parties, okay? So what we want to note here is we start off with the first two-party system, okay? So the first two-party system, which is, of course, the Hamiltonian Federalist and the Jeffersonian Republican Party. Now, I always say Jeffersonian Republican. I think lately, the exam's been preferring Democratic Republican, but we're talking about the same party there, okay? Now, another thing we want to note, we were talking about yesterday, remember the Federalist Party is not necessarily the same thing as the Federalists who favored the ratification of the Constitution. for example, James Madison was an author of the Federalist Papers, but he was not a member of Hamilton's Federalist Party. He was part of Jefferson's party, okay, the Jeffersonian Republican Party, which sometimes is referred to as the Democratic Republican Party. So this first party system is around from about 1791 to 1816. It starts off during George Washington's presidency, and then it lasts through the War of 1812. Now, the key things that we have here in the first party system, and I've got a video on this as well if you want a little bit more explanation, that Hamilton and John Adams are leading the Federalist Party. Now, again, federalism, the principle of federalism is the division of sovereign authority between between state governments and and a central government. Okay. So as far as that goes, that is federalism. But then you've got the Federalists. Those were the people who wanted to ratify the Constitution. And then they just kind of carry that name into the first party system. So note that the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist, now an Anti-Federalist would be most likely to join Jefferson's party. And a lot of people who originally supported the ratification of the Constitution are Hamilton's party, but understand that this is different. Okay. Hamilton's Federalist Party is different than Madison, Hamilton, and Jay going against the Anti-Federalists. So don't confuse Jefferson's Republican Party with the Anti-Federalists. Now, as far as federalism, Hamilton and his party preferred a strong central government, whereas Jefferson and Madison preferred states' rights. Their fears, okay, so they're guided by a fear on Hamilton's side of anarchy and mob rule, whereas Jefferson and Madison are much more concerned, what if you give government too much power and you end up with a tyranny? And Hamilton, a strict, oops, no, don't want to do that. Okay, Hamilton, loose construction of the Constitution. Okay, and then you've got Jefferson with strict construction of the Constitution, which is basically if it's not there, then that's it. Okay, so then the support base. Okay, so you've got an urban support base for Hamilton, whereas Jefferson more rural. Now, at this time, note that 95% of Americans lived in a rural area at this time. So Jefferson had an advantage there. Now, it's during the Progressive era that you start to see the transition to the majority of Americans living in urban areas. So in the 1900 census, for example, 40% of Americans lived in urban areas, whereas by the 1920 census, the majority of Americans lived in urban areas. So to me, that's a nice little bit of information and note that, until the conclusion of the Progressive era, the United States was majority rural. Was majority rural. You see, that's very, very close, isn't it? Majority rural, majority rural. Okay, so Jefferson's like majority rural, y'all. All right, so Hamilton believes that the government should promote manufacturing, whereas the Jeffersonians, no, laissez-faire, and that's what's best for agriculture. Hamilton is a fan of the national bank. Remember, this is an implied power. So note when you're looking at something like this, this is a system, okay? Hamilton wants a strong central government, loose construction, promoting manufacturing. A national bank fits into this whole system, whereas Jefferson, very much against the national bank. Hamilton favored high tariffs to help. Now, you don't necessarily see protective tariffs during this time, but Hamilton wanted that sort of thing. So Henry Clay's American system, we'll talk about later, very Hamiltonian. So federal assumption of state war debts, yes and no. Foreign policy, Hamilton and his party were Anglophiles. That means they are more likely to favor Britain than France, whereas Jefferson and his party, Francophiles. They tended to be supportive of the French Revolution. And so that's what we're looking at there from the first two-party system. Now, what happens here is the War of 1812 moves things around a little bit. Okay, so as far as that goes, let's go into the War of 1812 for a little bit, shall we? So one thing that I think is interesting, of course, Jefferson wasn't a big fan of Washington's neutrality proclamation. Jefferson thought we should be a little more low-key about our neutrality. and not just come out and say that we're not getting involved. You know, Jefferson didn't necessarily want to send troops to France or something, but he believed that we, you know, should just kind of be low key. Whereas Washington wanted that. Now, I would actually, JD, I would take issue here with what's being said here in the chat. Okay. So, as far as that goes, I don't think Jefferson changed his changed his views here. Okay. Now, Kaylee, you can actually find that on YouTube. And also remember this will, yeah, don't give me the go back here, because after the broadcast is over, you can actually go back and and see the archive. So it's okay. But also, this is something that is available on YouTube if you go to Jefferson versus Hamilton, the first two-party system. So now the thing is that, okay, Jefferson with the Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson said this needs a constitutional amendment because the Constitution does not empower the government to add land. So in this case, it is something that scholars, they'll say, well, Jefferson is compromising on his principles. But then again, it is the treaty making power. Madison's like, bruh, okay? Madison's like, bruh. This is a treaty, okay? This is a treaty with France. The treaty making power is not limited. So you see sometimes like the taxation power. The taxation power is limited to paying the debts of the United States, the general welfare, and the common defense, okay? So the taxing power is limited to certain things. The treaty making power is not. Now, Jefferson, he was willing. Now, that is something. I mean, Jefferson was willing to stretch things a little bit when it benefited him. I mean, this is talking about, the Louisiana Purchase was something you really can't say no to. But I would say that Jefferson purchasing Louisiana, that kind of loose construction, and then creating a bank that's just not there. So note here that even though I'm taking issue with it, it's not something that's without merit. But I think that, with Jefferson, yes, he is willing to compromise on his principles a little bit, but I wouldn't say that he changed his principles per se. But there were times where Jefferson, as president, certainly is more willing to use government power than you would think, given his conduct beforehand. Now, the other thing is we want to note that Washington, during when the Napoleonic Wars started, Washington had been a big fan of neutrality. Now, Jefferson, even though Jefferson, takes over as president in kind of a hostile takeover, defeating John Adams, Jefferson, in his first inaugural address, he does basically, signal that he is going to follow the neutrality policy. He says, kindly separated by nature and from a wide ocean from the exterminating havoc of one quarter of the globe. Okay, exterminating havoc. Back in the day when Europeans were killing each other, we stayed out of it. Now we're like, hey, here's some money so you can keep killing each other, kind of thing. Like the United States, much more involved in what goes on in Europe than we used to be. So he says here, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. Now, the thing is, one thing we want to note about the War of 1812, that before the War of 1812, Jefferson's party was very committed to what I call the Jeffersonian economic model. And basically that the United States should produce raw materials and should import finished goods, that there should be no manufacturing. Remember, Jefferson wrote in his notes on the state of Virginia that manufacturing is filthy, it's dirty, it's not conducive to republicanism, and so we should let Europeans manufacture in their dirty, filthy factories. We send them raw materials, they send us finished goods. We don't have to do all that stuff. Okay. Now, the problem is, though, that during the Napoleonic Wars, the British, they blockade European ports. And then they start, this policy of impressment. And this isn't like, whoa, I'm so impressed. Whoa, that's a cool British ship. Impressment, pressing American sailors into service. The British are boarding American ships. They're pressing them into service. And so with that, Jefferson tries the embargo. Oh, this cursed grabbed me. I tell you what, I love that cartoon. Darn it, how he nicks them. Oh, this cursed grabbed me, and get it. grab me is embargo spelled backwards. Oh, this cursing oh grab me. Okay, I mean, I love that cartoon. Look at that snapping turtle. It just like totally just bit in there right on the butt. And so with that, the embargo is typically seen as a failure. And this is something that there's a lesson in it because Jefferson had been warned by his Secretary of the Treasury, Albert Gallatin. He said governmental prohibitions always do more mischief than had been calculated. And it is not without much hesitation that a statesman should hazard to regulate the concerns of individuals as if he could do it better than themselves. And so I would say that Jefferson compromised his principles probably more with the embargo because he believed that a government policy was going to be the answer to what was going on with Britain. Okay, and so he used a very heavy-handed policy of cutting off all trade. Now, the other thing that we see here, though, with the embargo in the War of 1812, what we're starting to see is that the Jeffersonian economic model is not viable if Europe is at war. The problem with it, according to some, is that it counts on Europe being at peace. Okay, it counts on Europeans not killing each other. And so that's where, as a result of the War of 1812, Henry Clay comes up with this idea of the American system. Remember, Henry Clay was a war hawk. And so NIP. Now, you could say Penn, but the problem with Penn is Penn can also be spelled with an E. So I like to use NIP. Henry Clay's American system, let's nip it, okay? So if we're going to nip Henry Clay's American system, a national bank, okay? So the first bank of the United States that expired in 1811, we need to bring that back, and he does. Internal improvements, infrastructure. Okay, so national bank, then internal improvements, or you could say infrastructure, roads, bridges, and canals. Then the protective tariff, a protective tariff to support domestic manufacturing. Now, this is very, very Hamiltonian, okay? Like Alexander Hamilton would very, very much approve of this, of this sort of thing here. So one thing that we note as a legacy of the War of 1812 is that Jefferson's party becomes, even though the War of 1812, thanks to the Hartford Convention, the Federalist Party is basically dead on arrival after the War of 1812, after the Hartford Convention. But although Hamilton's party ceases to be a political force after the War of 1812. You see that actually I've got a little animation here that I feel like deserves to be seen, right? So you got Hamilton here. The War of 1812 killed the Federalist Party. Now look, okay, yes, now his little glasses are going to come there. So, but the thing is, the idea of a purely agricultural economy was no longer viable after the War of 1812. So that's something, and actually, I'm gonna share some tutoring notes. Let's see, War of 1812 and the American system. Okay, so I'm going to share some notes here in the chats that y'all are welcome to consult. Let me go ahead and just put this out there. I'm going to put this into the chats. Oh snap! Okay, Parrish says. All right, so as far as that goes, let's see here. Yeah, RIP Federalist, but this is their ideas are not done. Okay, so what I just shared is a link to some tutoring notes that I've got here that could be helpful to you. Okay, so this is something that the War of 1812, basically pre-1812, post-1812. So we want to note here, again, the first two-party system is over with the War of 1812, but the Jeffersonian Republican Party became more open to Hamiltonian ideas. Because what you're going to see as a result of the War of 1812 is basically, James Monroe is going to be elected in 1816. Monroe is elected with 84% of the electoral vote. Now, what he does, and I wish that presidents would do this today, okay, that even though Monroe was a Republican, the view was back then that once you become president, you cease to be a member of a political party. And so what James Monroe did, and what resulted in this here, is Monroe decided, I'm going to go on a goodwill tour of New England. I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to the people who didn't vote for me. Okay. Whereas, the presidency has become a highly partisan institution today. But James Monroe, like, it was actually New Englanders who coined this term, an era of good feeling, okay, or an era of good feelings, as we like to say it, because it makes more sense to us, right? So, with that, in 1820, James Monroe is almost unanimously elected. One New Englander decided he wanted to vote for John Quincy Adams. But other than that, he gets in there. And this is basically this era of good feeling is a period between the two party systems. Now, it's not without controversy. Like, for example, you've got the Missouri Compromise happens during this time, where, this is Henry Clay's first big compromise, where you've got, Missouri enters the Union as a slave state, then Maine is carved out of Massachusetts and brought in as a free state. And then you've got the Louisiana Purchase, no slavery in the Louisiana Purchase north of 3630. I've got a video lecture on the Missouri Compromise that you're more than welcome to look at. So then, if we go on to to the second party system, okay. Before we do that, let me just kind of go through some of these notes here. Basically, we want to note that the War of 1812 did make some differences, but we do want to make clear that cash crop agriculture is still going to be the backbone of the United States economy, and especially in the South. Like, Southern cash crop agriculture is going to remain the most profitable sector of the economy for quite some time. And so that's something that we want to note, that there is continuity as well. Now, the other thing we want to be clear on is the difference between a revenue tariff and a protective tariff. They're both taxes on imported goods, but then we have here the revenue. So a revenue tariff, it is just passed to create revenue for the government, to give the government, to get the government money to operate. Whereas a protective tariff is not so much concerned about about funding the government as promoting domestic industry and protecting it from foreign competition. So revenue tariffs tend to be lower, tend to have no ulterior motive. Protective tariffs tend to be high in order to discourage foreign trade. Okay. So with that, now remember that the tariff question, this is something that led to the nullification crisis. Now, I want to hit a few things here, because there is a place where we can look at a graph here of tariff policy throughout United States history. So when we look at this here, we see that, you have, like, the American system kind of peaks here in 1828 at the tail end of the presidency of John Quincy Adams. The tariff of abominations is the tariff of abominations is the highest tariff ever passed in the history of the United States. Now, note that after the tariff of abominations and the nullification crisis, we see that tariffs go down quite a bit, okay, for a while. Now, after the Civil War, or during the Civil War, and then for some decades after, during the so-called Gilded Age, they remain high. They go down a bit during the Progressive Era, where we've got the income tax, and then we see them get to a low in 1920, whereas during the 1920s, the Republican pro-business presidents, they bring the tariffs up. And then during the Depression, hey, how about a second highest tariff, okay, in the history of the United States? And let's pass a big protective tariff so that we can protect jobs, and then, basically destroy global trade, cut it down by 2/3. And that was like a very stupid decision by our government. As far as the Great Depression, it's like, did the Great Depression just happen, or did Hoover as president, along with his Congress, make some really stupid decisions that turned, an economic panic into the Great Depression? Now, one thing that we're going to note about tariffs is we want to note here that when you're looking at, this, just one second there, when you're looking at this post World War II, we see the effects of globalization. Okay, so one thing that we want to note here, because I've seen this on some exams, like anytime I'm thumbing through like an old APUSH exam, not too old, but just a few years old, it likes to focus on the effects of globalization. So globalization, you see here that there is a tendency toward free trade. Okay, so this is something where you see that tariffs are lower than they have been at any point. They're not a primary source of revenue for our government, and they're very low. And that way, it encourages the importation of goods from from different places. Okay, so as far as our textiles, we don't make textiles anymore. So low tariffs, we can import textiles from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all of these places. Okay, so as far as that goes, globalization, we've got less American workers in manufacturing, and union membership is lower than it was before World War II. It's like the high point of American union membership was about between the 1930s and the 1960s. So that's something, just a little thematic moment there in our review. But let's go back to the question here. Okay, the question was, when we think about the second two-party system, so you've got the era of good feeling, or the era of good feelings, depending on who's saying it, but it was first termed the era of good feeling. And you've got here the 1824 presidential election. I mean, that is a mess. Okay, that is a mess. And so you see here that Jackson, he wins, as far as the electoral vote and the popular vote, he's got a plurality. Okay, so now a couple things here. First of all, Jackson has more electoral votes than anyone else. And also, when you look at this map, Jackson was the candidate who appealed across sections. Like every other candidate, you can see a very clear sectional kind of thing here. And so this is something I think is worth noting, that Andrew Jackson is getting electoral votes from New Jersey to Illinois, from South Carolina to Louisiana. Whereas John Quincy Adams in the Northeast, Henry Clay in the West, and then you've got William Crawford in the South. Now, with that, notice that Henry Clay has used his influence as Speaker of the House. He gets knocked out. Okay, the fourth candidate, Henry Clay, was fourth place, and so he did not go on to the next round. And so it's obvious here he threw his support to Adams. Now, John Quincy Adams, makes Henry Clay his Secretary of State, which at that time was kind of a stepping stone to the presidency, if you look back at the old aristocratic republic. Now, if you are going to be watching videos, one of my favorite lectures of mine, what I would say is one of my most underrated, as far as, when I think about the importance of the content of the lecture versus how many views it gets, it is a very important thing here, because it's showing us it's a lecture titled Aristocratic Republics versus Democratic Republics. And in the aristocratic republic of Jefferson and Madison, Jefferson picks Madison, Madison picks Monroe, Monroe picks John Quincy Adams, and then John Quincy Adams picks Henry Clay. Now, what they're not looking at, they're looking backwards. It doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it, because in an aristocratic republic, deal making is expected. Deal making among elites, that's something that comes with the territory. Now, in a democracy, people in a democracy, they don't like to see deal making between elites. So this corrupt bargain, which it's nothing on paper, but it's like, come on now. I mean, something was at least tacitly agreed to, it looks like. But with that, this is something that Henry Clay will never be president. Okay, so that's something to note there. But Henry Clay will run for president several times, and he will be something of Jackson's something of Jackson's arch nemesis there. And so with that, that then we see the development of of this second two-party system. Okay, so what happens here is you've got the Federalist and the Jeffersonian or Democratic Republicans, depending on what you want to call them. Then you've got the era of good feelings, where everyone is a Republican. Then they start to call themselves national Republicans, Democratic Republicans, and by the 1830s, this is turned into Whigs and Democrats. And so with that, you've got here some of the same things as the first party system, okay? But then some new things on top of that. So Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson. Now, Clay is more nationalistic, stronger central government, whereas Jackson's the states' rights guy. Clay's party they had a tendency toward elitism, and that's what kind of makes them, there's only 1 2 year period where the Whigs controlled the Senate, the House, and the presidency. So Jackson's party pretty much runs the table through most of this period of the second two-party system. The Whigs were more likely to support moral reform and antebellum reform movements. The Democrats not as much. Henry Clay's more of a loose constructionist. That makes a bigger role for the federal government. Jackson, a strict constructionist. Henry Clay wanted government to involve itself in the economy in order to help with economic development. Andrew Jackson, more of a laissez-faire guy. And then the American system. Okay, so you've got yes, 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 NIP, 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 National Bank Internal Improvements Protective Tariff. Whereas Jackson, the Democrats, no on the National Bank, no on internal improvements from the federal government. And now the issue here, and part of what drives the nullification crisis, as far as that goes, the Democratic Party, its northern faction supported protective tariffs because they are involved in industry, whereas the southern faction was against tariffs. And so that's part of what sets up that conflict in the nullification crisis. So that is the second two-party system, which lasts into the early 1850s. Okay, so as far as that stuff, imagine going by a nickname. All right, so with this, yeah, Jackson said the bank was a hydra of corruption. A hydra is a type of mythological creature. Dr. Headley's class, Dr. Headley's APUSH class, shout out to y'all. Now, I need to do some Instagram shout outs when I'm broadcasting as well. So Dr. Heasley or Dr. Headley. Okay, I had it right. Okay, so Dr. Headley, what a legend. All right, so with that, let me go into what I've got, here in terms of the, of the War of 1812 and the American system. I've got some things here where I go into basically the implementation of the American system and the opposition to the American system. Okay, and so as far as that goes here, let's see who we've got watching us right now. We've got Fatima, all right, and Fatima from we've got representing Pakistan. Eid Mubarak to you. And to your family. And we've got Nika as well. Let's see, we've got Mary Grace Decker and Izzy and Lemony Chains and Carly Olmstead. Thank y'all very much for your support. And I'll do another Instagram shout out before I conclude this broadcast in the next half hour. So with that, you see that Madison signs the Second Bank of the United States, but then of course Jackson does his bank war. Okay, that basically the bank's trying to kill me, so I'm gonna kill it. He really allegedly told somebody that, really allegedly, right? Internal improvements. You've got the Cumberland Road, which of course the Cumberland Road, so that was something that was going between several. This was the national road. It's going from Maryland to Illinois. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 states there that it's going through. Interstate commerce. Now, Henry Clay wanted to try to pull a fast one. All right. Henry Clay basically, Jackson vetoed the Maysville Road. Henry Clay from Kentucky, he put some legislation out there for the federal government to build a road between Lexington, Kentucky, and Maysville, Kentucky, in order to connect Lexington, Kentucky, with the Ohio River. And Henry Clay's like, well, connecting Lexington, my hometown, connecting my own hometown to the Ohio River, that's going to help interstate commerce. And Jackson's like, the road's only in one state. All right. And Jackson's like, veto. All right. So with that, this is something that causes a lot of clamor. Now, one thing to note here is there are a lot of projects like New York's Erie Canal that are funded by state governments. Okay, so state governments are doing their internal improvements. So it's not whether internal improvements should be done or not, but is this the job of the federal government or is this the job of state governments? Whereas Westerners like Henry Clay, they wanted to have assistance in putting this sort of thing together. So after the tariff of 1812, you know, 1816, 28, and of course the nullification crisis. All right. So as far as that goes, let's see what other questions we're going to run in here. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, Romulus APUSH Review is available at the App Store and on Google Play. All right. So as far as keep slaying, okay, I will do my best to keep slaying, Shy. All right. So as far as that goes, yes. Henry Clay was the great compromiser. And Cam, remember that Henry Clay is responsible for 3 compromises, which is kind of something that is you know, with Henry Clay, the great compromiser, there are 3. One of them gets forgotten. You know, you've got the, you know, of course, the Missouri Compromise, then you've got the Nullification Compromise, and then you've got the Compromise of 1850. Now, one thing I'll note here is the Compromise of 1850. You know, this is something that I have on my website. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put that, you know, and put that out here. We're going to go ahead and get that, you know, get that going here. So the Compromise of 1850, I'll go ahead and put these lecture notes on there. All right. Yes, that is Clifford the Big Red Dog on my Band-Aid. Okay, so yes, I saw Clifford Band-Aids, and I was like, I cannot say no to this. Like, I want, like, when I hurt my finger, I want there to be a Clifford Band-Aid. So yes, when somebody's like, yeah, is that a Clifford Band-Aid? It totally is a Clifford Band-Aid. So so guilty. All right. So or actually, I'm not guilty of anything. I didn't do anything wrong there, right? Okay. Remember, as far as that, the APUSH multiple choice you know, strategy session is happening later tonight. Now, the Compromise of 1850, I've got some blog lecture notes here that I just linked, and then I've got you know, the Compromise of 1850. I've got a lecture here, and then I've got a Compromise of 1850 wrap. Okay, so California is a free state, stronger Fugitive Slave Act. Now remember, this becomes the most explosive provision of the Compromise of 1850, with some states passing personal liberty laws, basically guaranteeing a jury trial to anyone who is, you know, who's accused of being a runaway slave. Popular sovereignty in New Mexico and Utah territories. The Texas bailout, basically Texas gives up this this land here in return for you know, $10 million or $10 million, okay, which to pay off their war debts, and then abolish the slave trade in Washington, D.C. So with that, I've got a few things there, and you've got some things that you can look at there. Let's see what other questions we've got here. All right, so the Compromise Tariff of 1833 ended the nullification crisis. Okay, so Madeline, you know, the Compromise Tariff of 1833 ends the nullification crisis. Basically, you know, is, let's see here. Oh, well, we've got Miss Landers has some questions. I need to make sure to get to some of those. And so, yeah, I can't find that now that I've got that here. Yeah, the Compromise Tariff of 1833. Basically, what happened here is, on one hand, you know, Congress passed the Force Bill, which basically authorized Andrew Jackson to use force to collect the tariff. Now, all indication seems to point to, if Jackson would have used force to collect the tariffs, South Carolina would have responded with its state militia. So the other thing that passes is the Compromise Tariff of 1833, which basically South Carolina accepts the Compromise Tariff, and then they nullify the Force Bill, and nobody really, you know, that's the end of it. But it's like, okay, there we go. So with that, who would be an opponent of Henry Clay's American system when it comes to the national bank? Jackson. Okay. When it comes to internal improvements, Jackson. Now, also remember, Madison vetoed an internal improvements bill, but he vetoed it, saying, I think it's a good idea. It's just not the Constitution, and it needs to be added there. And so when it comes to the protective tariff, I would say Calhoun, okay, would be, you know, your biggest opponent of the protective tariff. Miss McClellan's class, hey, how's that? All right, glad to see y'all here. So one thing about the utopian communities, yeah, as far as that goes, Miss Landers, I don't typically see, now watch this come up and be the DDQ or something like that. I don't typically see the utopian communities come up. I would tend to focus, unless I'm trying to get like a 6 on the exam, I would focus on the antebellum reform movements such as abolitionism, temperance, women's rights, and so on and so forth. So I wouldn't put as much emphasis on the utopian communities and stuff like that. Now, we could go into transcendentalism. Okay. Yeah. The thing is, depending on the textbook that you're using, it's something that, but besides the AMSCO and a handful of other books that are written specifically for the APUSH exam, a lot of those college level textbooks, they're going to be something that is going to, they're going to go into things that aren't necessarily going to be on the exam. Yeah, I said a 6. Yes, thank you, Kaylee. You got my tone there. So transcendentalism, this was a philosophy. It focuses a lot on self-reliance and individualism to the point. I tell you what, one of the things I want to do this summer, I want to read some more Henry David Thoreau, okay? Because Henry David Thoreau, he goes out to Walden Pond, spends some time out there, and I think his mom's paying his bills or something like that. But your mom's paying your bills, so there you go. So that kind of thing. He spends some time alone out there. And then he comes back and he makes an impassioned speech about the Mexican-American War. He writes civil disobedience, which actually we call it civil disobedience. The original title is about, it is, let's see, civil disobedience. I believe it's like on resistance to government or something like that. I mean, it's actually like the original title, so let's see. Yeah, resistance to civil government. Okay. Basically, Henry David Thoreau is like, look, slavery is wrong. The Mexican-American War is an unjust war. And if you pay taxes, then you are supporting this injustice. Okay. You're supporting these shenanigans. And so Henry David Thoreau's like, I'm not going to pay my taxes, because when I pay taxes, I support a government that supports injustice. I'm not paying my taxes. Okay. And so the thing is, when you think about transcendentalism, it's like a very hyper individualistic kind of thing that I have a right to my morality. I have a right to be true to myself and what I believe, even if it comes to the point of not paying taxes to this unjust government that fights unjust wars and holds people in bondage. And the other thing here, Henry David Thoreau, is, the more I, start looking at him, a very libertarian kind of figure. And when you think about his opposition to slavery, what is his big problem with slavery? It is a system of force. It is a system through which one person exercises ownership and force over another. And so, yeah, Al Capone not paying his taxes for other reasons, but yes, Al Capone, Henry David Thoreau, that meme format where they're shaking hands, not paying taxes. Okay, so yeah, so if we were gonna say here, yes, Al Capone and Henry David Thoreau not paying taxes. That's a great one. All right. So as far as that stuff there, now we'll note here that so the women's movement in this period versus in the progressive era. Now I think that the big difference that we're going to look at is the women's movement, kind of like in AP Euro, where you've got this women's movement, at the Seneca Falls Convention that is calling for women's suffrage. I would say that continues through the progressive era, basically looking for political rights for women largely. For women to be able to own property, in marriage and maintain their property, civil divorce, and that sort of thing. Okay, so basically a woman's rights within a marriage and a woman's right to vote. Whereas, in the 1960s and 70s, that's where women, it's not just about voting, it's about equal access to professional employment. And what I mean by professional employment, that's like when you think about medicine and law and academia, professional employment. These respected professions that women have access to them, access to birth control, access to equal pay and equal work and that sort of thing. So that's something that I would be more likely, if I were comparing, I would say that the progressive era, suffrage movement is a continuation of what happened during the antebellum period. And one thing that Miss Landers is bringing out here is the antebellum period is basically laying the foundation for some of these, for some of these things that come around later in the progressive era. So whether it's abolitionism or temperance, or women's rights or temperance, then you're going to see that in the progressive era, you've got the 19th Amendment, the women's right to vote, and then you've got the 18th Amendment, which is prohibition. John C. Calhoun was a Democrat. He was a member of the Democratic Party for the most part. Okay, and so with that, we've got here. Let's see. Let me see what we've got here up top. Okay, more generic. Yeah. So the thing is, Sarah, I would say that from what I can see in your question about a thesis, from what I can see here, it looks to me like I wouldn't go to either extreme. Okay. Now, you don't want to say, like, you don't want to be super generic, like political, economic, and social, but also the thesis is not the place to go into your evidence. Okay. You want to be very clear about previewing your argument, but you don't need to, you don't need to get into your evidence. Okay. So for example, let me show you what I would do here. Okay. So let's say that the LEQ, okay, let's say that the LEQ, and remember, ladies and gentlemen, I've pasted shared a link with y'all about the multiple choice strategy session that I'll be doing at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And remember, if you buy into that, you can share that with your friends. You can share it with your students if you're a teacher. Okay, so going from there, let's go ahead and take a look here. So the prompt here is evaluate the extent to which Spanish and French colonizers differed in their interactions with native populations in the period from 1492 to 1754. So what I say here, although New France and New Spain both existed for the purpose of imperial conquest and economic dominance, their relationship with native populations differed significantly because of environmental factors that caused the French relationship with the Indians to be much friendlier and on more equal terms. Okay, so I wouldn't just say like political, economic, or social. The Spanish colonizers, who used Indian labor to generate wealth for themselves, did not have nearly as good of a relationship with the French, who had a much friendlier relationship with the Indians based on the fur trade. So that's something that, you could do something like that. That is going to be an acceptable thesis. So with that, now I don't think I would go very, but this would be like a minimal kind of thesis here. Okay. So Spanish and French colonizers were overall very similar to each other because they both wanted to make money and convert the natives to Christianity. So keyword here, because. Okay, so basically the thesis has to make a clear claim and it needs to have a line of reasoning. Now, I typically like there to be, two reasons. Okay, so Spanish and French colonizers were overall very similar to each other. So what are two reasons why that would be? So they both wanted to make money and they both wanted to convert natives to Christianity. So that's what we're looking at, with something like this. So with this, the Spanish, the encomienda system, like, you wouldn't mention the encomienda system in your thesis, but you would mention the encomienda system in your body paragraph. So Sarah, I hope that's something that you found, helpful. So what are some key reform movements and their short and long-term impacts? Okay, so again, when you think about, like, I would say that the big three would be abolitionism, temperance, and women's rights. Okay, those are going to be the big three. Of course, abolitionism, bears fruit in Reconstruction, whereas temperance and women's rights. Now, women's rights, you do get some additional rights for women during Reconstruction. That's where you start to see, like, in some of the constitutions, for example, I think Mississippi's constitution that was passed during Radical Reconstruction, it said that when a woman got married, the woman did not have to give up her financial property to her husband. So that's something that there are some things during Reconstruction that you see that. So shout out to Mr. Brotherton. All right. And so I would say that those tended to be, successful. It's just a matter of how long did it take for those movements to be successful. All right. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about what periods to focus on, Jay, we never know exactly what's going to happen with those. So that's something to keep in mind for that. All right. So, the exam is not comprehensive. This year, there could be some things that are on there and then some things that are not. So can I explain the issue with Jackson and the banks? Yes, gladly. Okay. And so as far as that goes, one thing I tell you, like Jackson's bank veto is one of my favorite documents. Okay. Because let's go back to McCulloch v. Maryland. Okay. So McCulloch v. Maryland is a Supreme Court decision where basically the second bank of the United States opened a branch in Maryland. The state of Maryland wanted to tax it. And so then the bank goes to the Supreme Court and says, they can't tax us. We're an implied power. And John Marshall's like, yeah, I like implied powers in loose construction. You're an implied power, supremacy clause. The state of Maryland cannot tax the bank. Now, to some people, that settles it. But Jackson says, no, wait. And this is something that I think is worth, getting into, is that Jackson, he says, look, the Supreme Court is not the only group of people that gets to interpret the Constitution. The Constitution should be interpreted by Congress. The Constitution should be interpreted by the president. And the Supreme Court should not have the final word on every single thing, okay? And so Jackson says, look, the Supreme Court said that the state of Maryland can't tax the bank. And Jackson's like, wait, the states never gave up the right to tax businesses operating in their states. And so the state has that right. The states never gave that up. Even though Jackson was against nullification, Jackson was, in most cases, a states' rights guy. And so Jackson says that the states have never given up the rights to tax businesses. And if the Bank of the United States can operate in the state of Maryland without paying taxes, that gives the bank a de facto monopoly and advantage. And then Jackson's like, look, the bank has stockholders. Okay. So the second Bank of the United States was this kind of like public-private partnership kind of thing. And so with that, in this kind of public-private partnership, of the Bank of the United States, there are shareholders. And so Jackson, when the bank is up for, rechartering, Jackson's like, as soon as I sign this recharter, the stock of the bank is going to shoot up. And that is not the federal government's job to enrich the rich at the expense of all of us. Basically, it's not the federal government's job to create this corporation that is going to enrich rich people, and not give, the regular person the ability to buy stock in the bank. And so Jackson's like, look, that this bank is an infringement on the rights of the states, and it is an institution that is, yes. So with that, water in it, but now that, yeah. So what was in the mug? Water. Okay. Yeah. That Jackson's like, look, it is not the, no, all right, JD. Don't do drugs, kids. And so with that, that's something to note here, that Jackson's big issues is that the bank, in Jackson's view, no matter what the Supreme Court says, that the bank as it was a violation of the rights of the states, and it's a violation of the principle that the government should stay out of the economy and should certainly not be making rich people richer. And so as far as that goes, you know, that's what we've got there. So difference between McCulloch versus Maryland, and Christine, you've given me a great segue here. Marbury v. Madison is the judicial review case. And McCulloch versus Maryland, that's also a martial court case. McCulloch versus Maryland upholds the idea of implied power, specifically the Bank of the United States. And so both McCulloch v. Maryland and Marbury v. Madison are martial court cases. Okay, they're both martial court cases, and you know, but one of them establishes the power of judicial review, and then the other one establishes the doctrine of implied powers that, you know, says that the bank is a legitimate power of the government of the United States. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, OMG, hi Rosa. All right, we all want to say hi to Rosa. You know, so yes, and Jose, good luck to everyone. And the Cold War era, I will look at doing that maybe tomorrow or something like that. But yes, Laurel, I think, yes, you definitely can. Like Martin Luther King Jr. did read Thoreau when he was in grad school, that Martin Luther King's ideas of civil disobedience, those definitely did come from, you know, those definitely did come from the, you know, from Henry David Thoreau. So yeah, you could, for, you know, bringing in that, you know, now again, complex understanding doesn't just come from one moment of brilliance, but if you did something like that, Laurel, it could definitely contribute to complex understanding. Now, again, ladies and gentlemen, let me just post that link one more time to the multiple choice strategy session. Okay, so that's going to be happening at 9:30 p.m. this evening. Okay, so MC strategy session. Okay, so that's going to be at 9:30. If any of you struggle with multiple choice, okay, that's going to be something that is going to be very helpful, I think, to you. Now, also, you can look up the document I've got online, the Ritchie Doctrine, but I'm going to be going into it. I'm going to be modeling. And again, if you buy a ticket to that, there's going to be a link there that you can share that information with your, you know, with your friends, or if you're a student, and with your students if you're a teacher. All right. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully I'll see some of y'all tonight at 9:30. Now, remember, tomorrow and Thursday, I will be broadcasting again at 6:30 p.m. You know, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Y'all go ahead and tell me what should be like, because I'm not going to be able to hit every historical period. We're not even to the Civil War. What should be the focus tomorrow? Okay, I'm actually open to. Thank you, Vicki. And you know, so with that, what do y'all think tomorrow? Should we go into the Civil War and Reconstruction? Should we go into the 20th century? Like, let me see in the chat, what are y'all thinking in terms of what we might, you know, what we might do there? All right. So going into that. So some of y'all, okay, so so we see here Gilded Age and Progressive Era. Okay, so you know what, we might do something, you know, maybe from the Civil War to the Progressive Era. How about we do that? Okay, so I think that we'll do like Civil War to the Progressive Era, Civil War to World War I, and then you know, after, you know, with that we can do 1920s. Well, actually, you know, the night before the exam, it's probably going to be like, you know, a you know, all that kind of stuff, you know, pretty much a free for all. Let's say that, you know what, how about that, we'll do, you know, I may just open it up from, like, you know, the Civil War on, and just see what questions are upvoted. How about we do that? We make it pretty flexible. We'll figure out something. We'll figure out something. So Reconstruction, Gilded Age, all of that. Okay. So I think that that might be a good thing there. And then, of course, the night before the exam, is going to be probably something of a free for all. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, y'all have a wonderful night, and I'll look forward to seeing some of y'all at the premium multiple choice strategy session. And then tomorrow I'll be back at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. It is always a pleasure.